Awesome. Cool. So it's yeah, I guess we're about time. So Peter, do take it away.
Okie doke. So this talk is about oatmeal, or more correctly, oat malt stout. Now I do like a good oat malt stout, and when it's brewed properly, it's a really excellent drop. It is a niche style, but it does have a very rich history. So I looked up Hornsey in history of beer and brewing, and oats were very widely used in brewing way back as far as the 15th century. And then I did a bit more googling and managed to find a mention of oat malt stout way back in the 1300s. So a long tradition. So just a very brief bio of me. I've been brewing a fair while. I did a graduate certificate of brewing at Ballarat University. I did the Siebel concise course. I won the Lallemand scholarship back in 2009. I'm a recognised judge, and my primary interest is researching old beers. And I've published 3 books, and I'm working on the next one. I currently use a custom built single vessel system for brewing. So what we're going to talk about today, we'll start with oats, because it is all about oatmeal stout. And then we'll look at the origins with McClay. We'll compare Australian oatmeal stout with UK oatmeal stout. And there's a Tooheys recipe from 1933 that we'll go through. We'll have a chat about the style guidelines, and then another recipe on one of the commercial examples, the Anderson Valley Barney Flats Oatmeal Stout, and then have a few different conclusions. So there's 3 very different recipes to try within this presentation. So as I mentioned, oats have been used in brewing for a very long time, and oats have seemed to have this image of being a health food, possibly because of the richness in beta glucans. And the main forms of oats used in brewing are oat malt, flaked or rolled oats, or whole oats called groats. So there's a range of choices here, and perhaps recipe decisions to be made. If you've got pre-gelatinized oats like instant oats, may have been so well, what's the right word, desiccated, that they might not be very oaty. Whereas a rolled or flaked oats, you might get more flavour and texture. If you've got steel cut oats, you probably need to do a cereal mash first to get the conversion. There's various crystal oats on the market. Symons Golden Naked might be too less oat to crystal. And then there's always the possibility of toasting porridge oats in the oven. When it comes to malted oats, there's quite a lot of suppliers, quite a few in the UK. There's a couple in Australia, and also I picked up that it was Viking in Europe. So the question is, malted oats for the best flavour? Well, so into the archives of the Tooheys brewery in Auburn and Sydney, and they had an analysis of malted oats. Now you can see that there is 15 to 29 degrees Lintner. Now that's the ability to self-convert without actually having enough enzymes in the oats to self-convert. So they will break down the sugars, etc. But you would probably want to use malted oats with barley malt to increase the diastatic power. So if we look at the descriptors that are commonly used for malted oats, you get creamy, and you get creamy. So if there's one thing that you should get from malted oats is a creamy feeling in the eventual beer. Now we're going to move on to the originator, arguably, of Oat Malt Stout, and that is McClay. Now, if we look at 19th century Scottish breweries, there's quite a lot in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, one in Falkirk, and then you've got in Alloa, you've got a huge amount of breweries, and it's only a relatively little town. But it seemed to have been a centre of brewing in the 19th century. The brewery was quite an impressive brewery, and I got this image from the Scottish Brewing Heritage Archive. It was closed in 2001 and nearly all of it demolished, apart from a small building that's been left as a brewery tap. So the history, established 1830. The brewery was built substantially in 1875. Then got turned into a limited company in 1896 with Alexander Fraser as the brewer. So the assets included the brewery, goodwill, and the patent rights. Now, all good breweries burn down, and it burnt down in 1910. Always a very tricky thing when you've got the potential of combustible grinding of malt and or improperly stored hops. It's always likely that you'll have a bonfire. So if we move to the actual patent, now they weren't shy about it. They did claim it as the beverage of the century, and it's interesting in its own right because I've not seen very many examples of patenting an actual recipe. In most cases, there are patents that relate to the process of brewing or improvements to the process of brewing, and this is one of the rare ones that I found is actually a patented recipe relying on oat malt. Now, a patent lasted in the UK in this period for 14 years. So we're 1895. Keep that in your memory. Now, it was always very, if you're claiming all these health benefits for oatmeal stouts or oat malt stout in particular, if you're touting these benefits, it was always good to get some endorsement from the medical profession. So the British Medical Journal or the Lancet, they both analysed McClay's oatmeal stout. So this was very useful because it actually gave us a proof spirit figure and a final gravity figure. The Lancet also analysed the bottle of beer and was very similar, except they commented specifically about a peculiar oaten flavour. So converting 11% proof is, and attenuated to 1014 is 6.3, and 11.21 6.4. So we very much have an end figure to consider. But the rub was in the Lancet, they weren't particularly keen on the taste of Oatmeal Stout. They couldn't see why you would bother. So, you go for the endorsement, and occasionally it comes with a bit of a barb. So here's an extract from the patent. Oat malt, barley malt, amber malt, burnt sugar, more sugar, licorice, ground linseed, hops, and suitable water. You would note there are no roasted malts there. It's relying on the caramel for colouring. Now, that's all the information of relevance to the to a recreated beer, and unlike most beers, you start off with the end game in mind, that you want to you have an OG that you're aiming to get to, and a ABV and all the rest of it. So in this instance, I sort of worked back and reverse engineered. So going through this, we have a whopping almost 71% of oat malt. We can see a fairly decent hopping rate of 2 pounds per barrel. That's imperial barrel, 36 gallons. You will also note that I looked at the period of time, and I discounted for the recipe that's coming up. I discounted the amount of hops by half to cater for poorer storage, perhaps a bit different alpha, use of seeded hops, etc., etc. And I have found with recreated brews that from the 19th century, that's not a bad rule of thumb, that if it's published, reduce it by half. Now, I mentioned about the double brown stout. I reduced the hopping by a third, and I think I might have made a mistake. But anyway, it tastes very good. So also we have here, we have licorice, and we have ground linseed. So we have 28 barrels, and we have an estimated gravity in brewers' pounds here. Now, it then becomes a question of what was the actual mash efficiency. So I got to 88% by looking at a range, and the range was, know what the final gravity is supposed to be, the OG, 22.4 pounds per barrel, which is the 626 brewers pounds divided by the brew length. And then I looked at a range of mash efficiencies that might result in that number. Now, that number was not picked at random, because a later brewing log also had 1062, which sort of meant that this was probably going to be a reasonable estimate. So here's the recipe. So 24 litre batch length, 75 mash efficiency. I use brewing water. So chose a suitable water, perhaps a black balanced. Lots of oat malt. Golden Promise, well, it's Scottish usually, or from the border country. Went with number 3 invert sugar and Parisian essence. Parisian Essence here in Australia, I had a look on the supermarket websites in the UK. It looked very similar to Sarson's browning sauce. You want something that doesn't have any artificial flavors, salts, etc. in there. So you do need a fair whack of caramel to get the color. So I chose to use the final gravity of 1014 to end up with 10.3, 6.3 ABV. And then added at 15 minutes the linseed and the licorice. So what we have here are the licorice, and I went with organic licorice via eBay. And I looked in the cupboard, and we did have linseed, which is flax seed. Now, apparently, linseed apparently helps those with constipation by softening and lubricating the bowel motion. So perhaps some of the health benefits were related to the linseed. I have used both of those ingredients in the double brown stout, and I cannot really taste the flavour impact of those items. But hey, your mileage may vary. Now, the use of extraneous materials, particularly in stouts, we lead to the whole question of adulteration. Adulteration, making impure. In the 19th century, the papers were full of pure malt, pure beer, malt and hops only. It wasn't helped by the great poisoning scare in 1901, where the invert sugar had been contaminated with arsenic and killed a few people. That was a few years of distrust in the brewing process. So there's a long history in the 19th century about the whole adulteration. This comes from Morris, from his book 1834 for a brown stout, as being sort of equivalent type of stout. And we've got boiled root, pleasant smell. Okay, so basically inoffensive. Cocculus indicus berry, its effect is of an inebriating nature. Bit of a worry. And Fabia amara, a hop substitute. Now, with a bit more detail, strong narcotic, imparts fullness and thickness. So it's a fictitious strength. So in beer tasting terms, it would taste more alcoholic than it actually was. So you could get away with a lower OG. And the Fabia amara bitter bean. The tricky things here are same genus as strychnos, as in strychnine. So really not a pleasant thing to put in a beer, and not recommended. So when we look at this whole question of hop substitutes, which came up in the 19th century, you got one class of narcotics. Well, they're obviously a no-no. But you've got this second class of bitters like gentian or cassia, where the textbook of the day by Grant Hooper in 1891, which is always good to get a contemporary view of the state of play from a decent textbook, he commented that the bitter was not as pleasant as that of the hop. The third use, it was these substitutes was to get tannin to very much help with clarification of wort. And I have seen a lot of old recipes that use caoutchouc for that purpose, I guess. Gentian's interesting. I particularly liked that it was the certain remedy for the bite of a mad dog. Always useful information on my presentations. You can look up and put your answers in the comment box as to what product uses gentian. Anyway, back to the plot. So we've got this protected by patent recipe for Oat Malt Stout. Now it's very very interesting. How did this patenting work out in practice? Now, McClay was a very small brewery. It wasn't a Bass or a Guinness that had a lot of resources to chase down those people that were copying their products or substituting inferior products. But with a patent recipe, there was this dispute between McClay's and the Nottingham brewery, which was also claiming to have an oat malt stout. Now, most sensible breweries got around the problem. They used oatmeal, and they called their stouts oatmeal stouts, neatly circumventing the whole thing about the patent. So after the 14-year period, you get an idea of what other people were doing within England. So Truman's, that's a London brewery, Groves, Dorset, Flowers, Stratford, and Eldridge Pope in Wiltshire, sorry, Dorset. They were all using various ranges of malted oats in their porters. Now, thanks to Neil Spake, who had a few photographs from the Scottish Brewing Archive, I was able to get an idea about the likely process that they were using. I got a recipe from Ron Pattinson, which was in the links that I put in on the system there, on the Slack. And I looked it up, and I couldn't reconcile the way that recipe had been put together. I thought that the content of the oat malt was too low. So then I looked into it further, and I got this slightly earlier one, and they very much had split this into a party-gall. So you had oat malt stout, and they had a column there that talked about what went into the copper, and they had another column there of what went into the converter. So the converter was being used as a supplementary copper. What went into the converter is my estimate. The grits equals maize, most likely, and oatmeal. So you've got an oat malt stout has moved on in the 10 years, is now a combination of oatmeal and oat malt. And then it proceeds in the normal way. So you've got 55 barrels of oat malt stout, and 28 barrels at 1044 of double brown. And so I chose to brew the double brown, mostly because it's less alcoholic. Otherwise I would have done the other one. So my updated recipe of what is on the Barclay Perkins blog is here. I have rebalance the amount of oat malt to getting on for 30%. As you can see, it's very similar to the original patent, and I have assumed that all the hops go in at boil. Now, this may or may not be the case. If you do brew this, I'd be interested to know if you change the combination of hopping times. I have a feeling after tasting my brown stout that I perhaps could have changed the timing as well. But then that's part of the delight of trying to recreate a beer and get it to a state that you really like. So the other variables that you could consider are perhaps use WLP002 for a different yeast, but you do want something that's not going to attenuate too much. And I've stuck with this general number to get around the ABV of 6.3, 6.4 like the original recipe. It's very likely that this beer was aged for a period and would have undergone a degree of secondary fermentation. Whether it had Brett in it or whether it didn't is a moot point. But in a oat malt stout, you would be not looking, I think, for acidity. Right, let's go to Australia. So we're going to have a look at Tooheys Oatmeal Stout. Now, I've already posted the recipe for this on the Slack. What's interesting here, and very much a trend in the 20th century, was to not have acidity in beer. So acidity, more like a lack of acidity, would give the impression of sweetness compared to an older style beer that had a level of Brett and possibly acidity as well. So a much more palatable beer, less sweet, but not lactose sweet, just less sweet than what had gone before perhaps. So we look at the comparison. We got Ushers, that's Ushers as in Wiltshire. Tooheys 5.4, Ushers 3.6. Tooheys 28% malted oats. Ushers 1.2. So very much lip service to any sort of oat content. And that's just a quick breakdown of the grist. And then if we come to Whitbread in 1932, I got these from the London Metropolitan Archive. Same grist for these three beers. London Stout and Oatmeal Stout, exactly the same beer, with a magnificent 0.7. That's 0.7% at best, even allowing for all the other stuff. So in terms of false and misleading, did it have oatmeal in it? Yes. Was it an oatmeal stout? Not really. So I looked at some of the other the other ones that I've got records for, and most of these come from my various books. The double oatmeal, so Eldridge Pope went with the wheat malt oatmeal double stout, so they went the whole thing, but they actually did have a fair bit of wheat in it. No roasted malts in any of these beers. They were all coloured up by caramel and various dark sugars. Now this is the recipe I've already shared. It's notable that most Australian stouts were dry hopped. I've not seen any records from the UK of dry hopping stout explicitly, but in a lot of cases they don't actually mention dry hopping at all. They just did it. So it does change the flavour profile to give it a bit of artificial bite, if you like, from having that little bit of dry hop in there. So when I put this slide pack together, the 2021 guidelines hadn't come out, and I thought, oh, I better update this slide. So you can get the 2021 guidelines online. They don't seem to have materially changed too much. So I've just highlighted just a couple of things there. The toasty, nutty, grainy, earthy. Well, there's a huge range there really in flavour. Medium to full body, smooth, silky, velvety, oily slickness, creamy. So if you're entering into competition, creamy is probably the thing that you should be aiming for. So if we look at the commercial examples, in the 2015 guidelines, they had Young's Oatmeal Stout, Sam Smith's Oatmeal Stout, and the Barney Flat's Oatmeal Stout. Now, Young's quite interesting, really, because they'd been brewing oatmeal stout, oat malt stout, making sure there was no patent issue, since 1905. And it probably was not much different to their actual stout if all the other practices be of the industry at the time. And of course the brewery is now defunct. Now, I went on a work trip in 2006 to London, and I arrived on the Saturday morning. I'd already arranged my whole day, so I arrived at 6 o'clock. I went to Earl's Court, where I was in a dog box piece of accommodation, as you do, because it's so expensive. And I'd already booked my tour for lunchtime at the brewery. And we went round the brewery. I met the rest of the tour party. There were, I think, about 5 or 6 Swedes, 2 or 3 people from America, and me, and a small French girl who was the tour guide. And we went round the brewery, and we had a wonderful talk amongst ourselves. I think the tour guide was totally in awe, because we were all homebrewers and we understood the process, and we're going, oh, it's one of those, it's one of these, you know. And then went into the tap room and drank a lot of oatmeal stout, chocolate stout, and I must admit I didn't have any jet lag on that trip whatsoever. By the time I'd got back to my room about tea time, I slept solidly for a good 12 hours. Anyway, the latest incarnation of Young's, having sold the brewery and the brands, it seems to be brewed by Marston's now, possibly at their Ringwood brewery. And this is from their website for London Stout. And there's a bit of an anomaly here, because it talks about an ABV of 4.3, yet the tap handle talks about 5.3. So it's the same with most decent beers, is once they've gone away from their home brewery and become a brand, it's a distant memory of what it might have been once, perhaps. We've got the Oatmeal Stout. Very little detail about what's in Sam Smith's Oatmeal Stout. I did find a recipe in Brew Classic European Beers by Wheeler and Protz, and there were 6% of oats in the grist. So I don't really know too much about that one. But while we're on brewery tours, the Anderson Valley Brewing Company is about a 2.5 hour drive north of San Francisco, and Jamil Zainashev had arranged with Val Allen for Barry Cranston, good mate of mine, to go and visit. We were there for the American Homebrew Conference, and this whole place, they bought a 1950s German brew house from some defunct brewery in East Germany, and it sits in this very small town in the middle of California. And they make a very nice oatmeal stout and also a very nice barrel aged stout, I must admit. So what I did, I hate the word reached out, but it's probably appropriate for an American. I contacted Val Allen. He was interviewed on the Brewing Network about this stout, and it was great. He actually sent me a spreadsheet with Barney Flat's oatmeal stouts from 2011 to 2015. So a complete range of stout. So I quizzed him on a few details, and something I would like to point out: it has a very low IBU. Which seems quite different from the more historical ones that I went through previously. So here's a Barney Flats from 2015. So they use roasted barley, not black patent. They do add Cascade as a hopback addition. They don't do any dry hopping, but they do put something in the hopback, and that's pretty much the US version. And for the rest of the world, here's the same version, but in metric. I've not brewed this one, but it looks like an interesting mix. He did mention that you could probably got a bit of flexibility in your bittering hops, given that it's such a low IBU rating. So this really does show that styles change over time. The late great Michael Jackson, the proper one, not the pop star, he stated that oatmeal stout had vanished in the late 50s, only to be reinvented. Well, I don't think so. McClay kept going until they finally demised in 1999. Young's 1905 at least, 2006. And Tui's, it had a very long run from 1933 and went right into the mid-1970s. And I think only got supplanted by the contract brewing of Guinness Extra Stout. So I don't think there's any real gap in oatmeal stout. It's been a style that survived over all these years. So my conclusions are that it's been going strong for 125 years. Yeah, you probably want to get to silky and creamy. It's not a sweet milk cream stout using lactose. No lactose. And it's not a dry Irish stout or a bitter American stout. It's very much in between those. The historic version's at least 25% oats. The Tui's example was very much in terms of oat malt. In terms of percentage, was very true to the original one. So whether a brewer from Tui's had actually been to the UK and got the inside on that one, who knows? 1930s English versions only had lip service to oat content, so that was all marketing. And the Anderson Valley one is a very different interpretation. So if you like this this chat, there's lots of more information on my various socials, and you can always email me if you want any if I've got any other information. I put all the resources on the Slack, and with that, I'm open to questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Peter. Everybody, appreciative, quiet round of applause. So yeah, I think I mean I had a question which I put on the chat about sort of what flavour the linseed should add.
Yeah, I can't really detect the linseed in the it seems to have been used as something like maltodextrin, you know, something to this is my reading of the text. I can't actually taste it in the beer, and I'm pretty sure I got the conversion right between you know, the amount of grams per litre to put in, but different linseed from the 19th century, who knows what they actually use, but perhaps it had enough to increase the body and mouthfeel.
Does it actually? So sorry, does linseed have a sort of a starchy kernel, or is it actually providing more than just flavour? Is it providing some sort of some gravity or some extract in there?
I don't think it's providing any gravity, not in those amounts. I think it's more if as it was being used to aid those people with constipation and lubricating matters without being too indelicate. It must have in the, because I use the whole linseeds.
You didn't mill them.
So I used. It talks about source of protein, fiber. So it all sounds like body type components, not particularly flavor. The licorice, I don't really get the licorice in, at least in the beer that I did, and I do like that tang of licorice in a stout. I think it gives it a certain something.
Whether or not linseed adds to the flavour, I don't know, but it's certainly listed as a superfood, and one of the benefits, apart from relieving constipation, is that it helps lower blood cholesterol. So you've got a healthy drink there, Peter, as well.
Linseed also used as an egg replacer, so whatever eggs would do, it will be doing that. You use it in cakes and things.
Yeah, okay. So it does talk about a source of protein, and eggs would be a sort of protein.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they put it in there because the oats are, you know, to break down the thing because of the protein in the linseed. I don't know if it's enough because it didn't look like very much compared to, you know, because back in the day, you know, 25% oats compared to what we're doing today.
It wasn't used in the mash, from what I've assumed it wasn't used in the mash.
It was an adjunct then, okay.
I've assumed it went into the boil. The licorice would have gone in the boil for sure, I guess. But it's such a small quantity overall. In a 24-litre batch, I put in 15 grams. So
Licorice also, from a health benefit side of your body, that's probably why they put it in there. It was more for, since it was considered maybe a healthy drink that the medical profession, because
Except if you have hypertension.
but right, but back, you know, again, back in the day, like
Guinness is good for you.
well, obviously, but perhaps that was their. But the idea of using a product for marketing is not a new thing. You know, an ingredient for marketing purposes is not a new thing at all. So it may have just been something put in for the to give it the right I don't know, feeling's not the right word, impression, you know.
no, it was a healthy drink. Come on now.
Oh,
yeah. Have you ever tried doing it with whole licorice root, or have you always used the shredded stuff?
I've used licorice from the Chinese supermarket. That was chunkier, that I chopped up a bit. I just went with the organic chopped licorice. I'm not sure about it. It's not that licoricey.
Yeah, I've used it before in a stout, and I've used sort of, but say in a 50-litre batch, I've put 5 whole sticks in. I can't remember how much grammage that was, but that's the sort of level I normally put in a stout if I'm using licorice in it. So I'm going to guess that's probably getting on for maybe 40-50 grams.
And the licorice came through okay with that?
Yeah, you can certainly taste it.
Mm.
So maybe just up it a slight bit.
Yeah, I went with. I'm a stickler when I give to other people in the brew club one of my recreation recipes. I do ask them to actually follow the recipe, knowing full well that they won't. But I always ask that. So I applied the same rules to myself, and I followed the recipe. If I was to do this one, the double brown stout is a 4.5% beer, rather than a 6.3. And I'm more likely to drink a 4.5% stout than I am a 6.3. I think if I was brewing it and putting a variation in, I'd change the hopping, and I use the naked oats from where did I get the naked oats from? Crisp, I think. I've used Oat Malt before from Baird's, I think it was, or Symons, and that to me was a better flavour. So yeah, the few tweaks as always. I would like to cut back on the hop rate. I think it's more hoppy than perhaps it should be. But I have done other recreations from Murphy's for stouts from the 1890s, and generally, even with all the discounting that I do, they're a lot more hoppy than modern day stouts. They're not quite up at the American stout range, but they're definitely a hoppier beer.
Peter, no doubt you'll be posting the recipe on a site or other. Could you also post a recipe that you would change it to? Because I think that would give us the benefit of your experience.
Yeah, I posted the 1933 Tui's one. If you're interested in the double brown stout one as being a more sessionable one. I'll tweak that one, and I'll pop that on the Slack as well if you like. No problem.
Please.
And Peter, sorry if I missed it, but when you loaded in all your hops at 60 minutes for the double brown, and so when you talk about it being too hoppy, do you mean too bitter or too hop flavored in the double brown case?
It's that's a good point. It's always difficult when you're drinking something and do the proper flavor description. So it's got too much hop flavor. It's not overly bitter, but it's got a dryness there that it's detracting. If the key words are silky and smooth, this one's got too many elbows, you never know what sort of alpha they did in the old days. So I put in cluster at 7% alpha. It may be that just the hops were too fresh, too powerful, and it's unbalanced. It does not taste like a smooth oatmeal stout, but it may not have been intended to be that. Yeah, and the proportions between the oatmeal stout and the double brown stout are pretty much the same. It's just at a lower gravity.
You get almost a neutral drying rather than any particular hop flavor of herbal, earthy, resinous, or whatever. You get more just a neutral impression of a drying hop.
Yeah, on the back palate, it's drier than I was about to say something that's a bit rude, so I won't say that. It's quite dry.
And not a tannic dryness then.
No, it's not a tannic dryness, and it's not an astringency. It's just a bit too much. Yeah. Did it? I take it nobody had a crack at the Tooheys Oatmeal Stout? No. Okay.
I'll have to do a future like club thing, do oatmeal stout or something like that. It's,
I'd like the next one I might do is the Barney Flats, because Fal Allen was very forthcoming. I wasn't expecting what he actually sent me, and I think that would be a smooth, quaffable oatmeal stout with the IBUs. So the IBUs calculated for the double brown came out at 36. So I think that probably needs to be nearer the 25, something like that. So I'll post an updated one. Not that will have brewed it, and if anybody does brew it, it'll be interesting to see how that comes out. I like Rob's comment about the cricket bat. I didn't really get. I did chew a bit. You should always chew your ingredients. And it was the linseed was just a bit, not much of anything really.
I was also going to ask about, like, I've personally not used sort of brewer's caramel or anything like that before, but is it purely the stuff that you use is purely for darkening the beer, for colouring, or?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it is, James. I've used it before, and it's one of those ingredients in beer smithy you have to add yourself because it's not in their list of ingredients. And it took me months to find out what your EBC color range was, and I put it in there at 33,000 or something ridiculous. It is phenomenal. You hardly need anything at all if you're going to use brewer's caramel. It's like treacle. It comes out.
I mean, if you didn't use it in these recipes, So you had a couple which it was in. Would it not come out? I mean, I'm assuming it's just not coming out dark enough, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of, because of the intensity of it and sort of just how thick it is and dark and viscous, etc. Yeah, you only have to use such a small amount. It's not going to add anything else except for color. It's not going to add anything to flavor, body, anything else, fermentability.
oh yeah, no, I was
nothing
just
at
like
all.
kind of like interested
Yeah.
if I just left it out then and kind of got the beer that came with it without the sort of color adjustment.
Well, you with these ones, you would have got instead of, I've run out of beer, but so I can't really show you. I think I would have added a touch more caramel. It was a very light milk chocolate color, whereas I would have liked it to be a bit more brown. Not at the so I use the browning essence, which is the 150C, I think it is, caramel, and I got some syringes from the chemist. They get awfully funny when you ask for a syringe. I don't know why it is. I explained I only wanted to dose my beer with it, and they gave me a look. Anyway, so some of the pale ales that I've done recreations of, unless you put 5 ml of caramel in, and I totally agree that there's no information as to the colouring capability of this stuff. So it's very much, after you've used it a few times, you sort of know how much you need per batch just to change the tint. So I might put 5 ml in a 20 litre final beer, and it changes it from an anemic pale colour to something that's just pale gold. Just it's all in the eyes. But with these stouts, if you don't put in the caramel, they end up too light, especially when they're not using much in the way of any roast malts. It's just not going to look right.
Mick was holding up something there. Mick, what was that?
That is your bottles of Symons browning you can get in the UK.
Ah, very good.
Yeah. So
And that doesn't have
it is freely available here. Yeah. If you don't want to go and get brewer's caramel. And I think it's pretty cheap. I didn't buy it. The missus got it in her. She goes to Slimming World, and she was Slimmer of the Week the other month. And that was in her basket of goodies she got for being Slimmer of the Week. So.
Well, there you go.
Is it likely to be very different from cinema then?
Ah.
Yeah, I reckon so.
I think it cinema to me. So one of the recreations that Barry Cranston did for me, he's a champion home brewer here in Australia. He said, "Oh, I didn't have any of that caramel muck. I used cinema, and I could bloody taste it. It's got a taste. And if you're trying to do a British bitter, you do not want a Germanic influence, as far as I'm concerned. It has a flavour component that this stuff doesn't have."
Yeah, I think it's almost sort of earthy. There's definitely a flavour to it. I'd agree. Yeah, I've dosed up some beers with it after brewing just for fun. But yeah.
Right.
Peter, if you wanted to replace that caramel for colouring with a roasted or caramel malt, what would you use, and what impact would it have on the flavour? Would it take it out of style, or what?
I think if you would depend on the beer. If we're dealing with these particular examples, I would tend if you wanted just to move it up a couple of notches, I tend to add a bit more crystal, because you've already got an amber malt in there. If you put a bit of dark crystal in, that would take it up a bit. Black patent malt to me has got very distinct flavour, which I quite like, because I noticed on the Slack people were talking about grinding it up and mash capping, etc. To me, part of the thing about a stout is it's got a bit of oomph, and I don't generally do that mash capping and grinding of dark grains. I just like it the way it is, a bit more flavoursome.
Talking about flavoursome, Peter, I was interested to see that TUI's advertising was talking about serving it as cold as possible. I thought, you know, with a stout, you tend to not have it, want to have it as cold as possible. What was the sort of thinking behind that, do you reckon?
They launched that bottled beer in Queensland in January. So you're in the middle of probably 30, 35 degree heat, and launched a bottled beer. And their thing was serving it on the ice. And just like nothing is new, the Guinness Ice Cold or whatever, it knocks the flavour out. So but it was a strange place to launch a beer, far north Queensland in the summer. So you could sort of understand that. Nobody seems to have mentioned what gentian's in. Anybody? No? Angostura bitters? Pink gins? So if you have Angostura bitters, you're safe from rabid dogs, apparently.
Luke said on the chat that it's excellent in a white Negroni.
I've not heard of Sue's liqueur.
It's a French liqueur aperitif, but the main ingredient is gentian root.
Yeah, my father used to be a fan of it, and it's disgusting. It's it's like chewing a dandelion root. Not that I've done that often, but you know, it's the taste of dandelion.
I have dosed I had a historic Australian stout, and it had gentian in it, and I thought, well, I won't put it in. And then I put a few drops of Angostura bitters into the stout, and it didn't really, nothing really made a huge amount of difference. So perhaps they were using it for, again, more marketing. I don't know.
Anyone else got any other questions, comments? No? Well, in that case, Peter, thank you very much for doing our presentation this evening. It's very enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Great, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.